Welcome to this holiday edition of the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary, and joining me today, one of my oldest friends and the author of the current cover story in Commentary Magazine, a surprise topic for many people who come to Commentary for political discussions and discussions of Israel and discussions of Trump. And all of these, maybe with the exception of Israel, do appear in Rick Marin's article, The Anti-Woke King of Hollywood Lets Loose, our January cover story. And yes, with me today, the author of CAD, Memoirs, Confessions of a Toxic Bachelor, former columnist for the New York Times, former critic for Newsweek magazine, and a longtime writer for television. Rick, welcome to the Commentary Magazine podcast.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So you have written pieces over the years about Hollywood for Commentary, about your, not really about your experiences, but very much informed by your experiences as someone who's written for 6 or 7 television shows over the last 20 years. And this is actually the second article that you have written for Commentary on the subject of one Taylor Sheridan. So why don't you tell everybody who may not know who Taylor Sheridan is, who Taylor Sheridan is, and why we would devote the cover of Commentary Magazine to Mr. Taylor Sheridan.
So Taylor Sheridan is a fascinating character. He is a former actor. For the first part of his career in Hollywood, he was a character actor who would appear in various TV shows that you may or may not have seen. And then I believe at age 40, he decided to write a movie script for a movie called Hell or High Water, which was sort of a bank heist set in Texas during the financial crisis. And it was about 2 brothers who, to save their ranch, essentially decide to rob a bunch of banks, the same banks that were ripping off his mother, and the reason they were losing the ranch. It got an Oscar nomination. It was very good. And it led to a bunch of other stuff. Notably, the first big hit was the piece that I wrote for you guys last time, which is about the TV show Yellowstone, which was passed on by every major place, HBO, all the big time places, and picked up by the Paramount Network and became a monster surprise hit, where it was the kind of thing where it was getting, the only thing that was getting better ratings than Yellowstone was NFL football.
And on on a cable channel that literally no one was watching, and that you had to search high and low simply to find on your cable dial, so that the fact that 14 or 15 million people would watch it in the course of a week was a miracle in and of itself, because nobody even knew where the Paramount Network was on there. This is not a streaming channel. This is a cable over the air channel.
Yeah, I mean, and it had a big star in Kevin Costner, and but yes, very obscure and hard to find. And it was sort of the success of it. It was described as things like a red state succession, in the sense that it was kind of a King Lear story about Kevin Costner as the paterfamilias of this Montana ranch family with originally 4 children, and who am I going to leave the ranch to? And it just became this monster hit that then led to a whole bunch of other shows, which is kind of what I wrote about in this piece, which is why we call him the anti-woke king of Hollywood, because he has now, I believe, an additional 6 series, all on Paramount Plus now. They're a little easier to watch than Yellowstone, which is still difficult because of complicated, kind of boring Hollywood reasons. But he has become Paramount's streaming service, Paramount Plus. He has become that network. He has a show called, he did a show called Bass Reeves Lawman, about the first original black marshal in the Old West. He did 2 prequels to Yellowstone, 1923 and 1883, both of which big hits, both very good. The stars like Helen Mirren and Harrison Ford. I mean, it's gotten to the point where huge stars are lining to do Taylor Sheridan shows. The most recent of which is Billy Bob Thornton, who's the star of this show called Land, which is about the West Texas oil boom, recent West Texas oil boom fueled by fracking, and it's centered around a kind of wildcat outfit who's run by a billionaire played by John Hamm. And Billy Bob Thornton is his landman, which is basically the man on the ground who deals with everything from cartels trying to claim they own the land to his crazy wife and daughter who come and live with him in his strange house that he shares with a lawyer and a roughneck oil worker. And what's interesting, and the reason we did this story was that he was always, as I said, people called Yellowstone red state succession because the politics of it were very his politics were kind of like all about being connected to the land, distrusting the federal government, rugged individualism, all that stuff. And you can see Kevin Costner embodying all those things. Very pro Native American, again, because they, in his view, are people who are close to the land and who have been, like, in his view, many people screwed by the federal government. So that was there, but a sort of libertarian conservatism.
What you might
Now,
call a weird combination
yeah,
of
for sure.
Jeffersonian, small is better than big, country is better than city, and individualism is better than government, combined with Jacksonianism, which would be what matters is what you produce with your hands. Banks are evil.
Absolutely.
Money is evil. Horses are good. Acres are good. People who
what else is evil? New York and Los Angeles.
Yes, evil.
Every one of his,
yes.
He never misses a chance to just. There's a movie, a very good movie he made called Wind River, which is about a murder set on an Indian reservation where this doomed character is kind of snuggling with his wife, and they're plotting how they're going to get off the reservation. Where should they go? New York, no way. Los Angeles, the guy goes, I'd rather be back in Iraq. So that's Taylor Sheridan's view of the Sodom and Gomorrah that are the the coastal urban elites do not fare well in a Taylor Sheridan world.
So Jeffersonian, Jacksonian, close to the land, 1923, one of these series. As you say, in the beginning of Yellowstone, the great antagonist to the Dutton family ranch is this Native American tribe that believes that this family back 100 years earlier expropriated its territory. As the show has progressed over the course of the 5 years that it's been on the air, or the 5 seasons, the enemy of the Duttons is now, because they are basically allied against lawyers, bankers, Washington, the state capital in Montana, because at least they both know that what matters is the beauty and the unspoiled beauty of this land, that all of these people want to come, who are billionaires, and fly their planes into a new airport and build horrible shopping malls and despoil the real America. So there's this odd journey. And in 1923, the sympathy toward Native Americans is so potent that there is a whole subplot about a Catholic school for Native American girls, which is an extraordinarily rough thing to watch, because it's all about how they are abused, tortured, raped, and how they start to take revenge against, again, another big institution that doesn't care about the little guy, meaning the Catholic Church. So this is a very, very interestingly politically flavored show that has absolutely nothing to do with current political correctness whatsoever. And now we journey into the present, into the two huge hit shows that are now on the air, meaning Landman and Lioness, which is his spy show. So he's got Landman is about oil. Lioness is a spy show. He had made 2 movies about the DEA in Mexico called Sicario and Sicario 2, and made a show about the mafia in Oklahoma called Tulsa King. He made a show about a town that is basically a prison that survives on being a town of prisons. That's Mayor of Kingstown. All of which offer a portrait of Trump's the America that Trump told us about in 2015, 2016, right?
Yeah, Lioness, which is a show about a female CIA, a program of female CIA agents. Allegedly, it's real, and they train agents female agents to infiltrate foreign governments or countries or whatever. I consider that his foreign policy show. So if you consider Landman as domestic policy, for Lioness is where now, you know what, one reason we thought this was a good piece is because now his politics were there before, but now they're sort of unleashed, right? So he can say whatever he wants at this point, and he is. So yeah, so in Landman, he'll deliver a scathing rebuke to a big city lawyer about the follies of so-called clean energy, right? I think you talked about that scene on the podcast earlier. In Lioness, he delivers a whole long peroration on the decline of the American empire. It reads like something that, Douglas Murray would have delivered at the Oxford Union, but he puts it in the mouth of a corrupt Mexican-American money laundering brother of a cartel leader. So he says what he wants, but he has a genius for putting it into the mouth of an interesting character. He's very good at he does a lot of research. I read about the movie Wind River, that he watched 3 years of LAPD shootout scenes to figure out how to accurately do a shootout. And what you realize is and it's the same with all this stuff, whether it's, either he's very good at, or he's got people who are good at researching and giving you information, but he'll do it in an interesting way. So Landman, the opening of Landman is Billy Bob Thornton delivering a potentially super boring account of the difference between surface and mineral rights, but he's doing it with a burlap bag on his head while being beaten up by cartel
Mexican
hitmen.
Drug cartel hitmen.
Yeah, so you're in right away, and you're listening.
Whom he negotiates with successfully. By the end of the scene, they're taking the bag off his head. They're all shaking hands and driving off together.
They come back and they're not so happy.
They're not so happy for
the most recent episode.
Yeah.
So, yes. So now he feels, I think, just completely comfortable. And who's going to tell him not to? Because these shows are all massive hits, to say whatever he wants. And he has strong opinions. So on the Lioness spy show foreign policy front, China is the big bad, and it's kind of a convoluted, complicated plot that China is doing something in Mexico that is on our soil through our borders. So then the message is delivered by the Secretary of State, played by Morgan Freeman, again, another huge actor he seems to have gotten. Well, let's teach them a lesson about open borders. So this results in going to the Iran-Iraq border and taking out 2 Chinese scientists who are being smuggled into Iran to show them that we don't pay attention to their borders either. I mean, it's the most aggressive, it's not really America first, because it's if they're doing something, go do something there. It's pretty muscular, aggressive foreign policy, but he leaves you no doubt about who the bad actors are.
There's another scene in Landman, to give you a sense. And by the way, these shows, we're making them sound didactic, which they are increasingly, but they are so insanely melodramatic that you can hardly tell, because someone's going to give a big speech and then somebody else is going to walk into the frame and cut their head off with a machete or something like that, just to make sure that you don't forget what you're actually watching. So there's a scene in a boardroom where some guy just starts ranting about the hostility to nuclear power.
Right.
Because all of these liberals hate nuclear power. And what are they crazy? Nuclear power is the best possible kind of power. And then John Hamm says, I don't care about any of this. All I want is for oil to be between $78 and $86 a barrel, and then I'll be rich, and in 100 years, we'll figure something else out. No one's ever had these kinds of conversations on network television before. They are conversations of the sort that you might hear at the American Enterprise Institute, except that no one then comes into the boardroom and cuts off somebody's head with a machete.
Right. I mean, he's just very good at, like, example of that Billy Bob opening with the burlap bag on his head. It's like, yeah, how do you make this information interesting? Well, have someone threatening to kill someone else while you're doing it. Or that scene I described with the drug dealer money launderer, the tension under the scene is that his daughter, a lioness, is there to try to turn him into turning in his brother. And he doesn't know that that's why she's there. And she doesn't know if she can even do it. She's very scared. So there's always dramatic tension under this stuff that, yeah, when we describe it, sounds pretty didactic. Like who's putting oil policy and, energy policy in a television show? But he does it in a way that, yeah, you're listening, because it's John Hamm telling this guy to shut up. And he has a gift for that. And the stuff it's very soapy, which is also his gift. It's a weird combination of ultra violence and soap in a way. I can't think of another series that had that.
Like, imagine Dallas, but in
Yeah.
Dallas, JR mows people down
Right.
with an AK-47 every episode and then drives them to a strange area in Texas where no federal or state person has jurisdiction, dumps the bodies, and then they just sit there forever and no one ever knows that anybody was killed. That's actually a feature of Yellowstone. That there is an area between Montana and Wyoming that is known as the train station that apparently does kind of exist.
Yeah,
where
that's
there
a
is
real
a
thing.
strange lack of jurisdiction. And so he figured out this is where this family, which is both like the Roys in Succession and like the Sopranos, can go and deal with the people they got to get rid of without anybody ever finding out. That's the other
credit to Taylor Sheridan and Kevin Costner for making a murderer someone you root for. I mean, that's the Tony Soprano of it. Yeah. I mean, he's having people killed by his henchman, who is now being spun off into his own show.
He's having his ranch hands branded to make it clear that if they ever try to leave the ranch, he'll have them killed. I mean, it's very, as I say, it's very, very, very soapy. But there is this one thing, which is that you work in television, so you go to these meetings, you go to these pitch meetings, and everybody's like, what are the stakes? We need to raise the stakes. There's not enough stakes in this show. There need to be stakes. And the stakes of Taylor Sheridan in this weird Jeffersonian, Jacksonian way is that what these people do is life or death. Not because it's life or death because, capitalism is going to destroy everything. It's that what they do physically, they are in danger, potential danger from at all times. You work at a ranch, a horse can kick you in the head and kill you. You need to put piping down on where there's an oil rig that needs to be replaced and the piping is not properly secured, and suddenly you're sliding down 200 pieces of pipe and your body is crushed under it. And that can happen any day at any time. And everybody on these shows says, I'm doing this for a living because I can make a lot of money doing it, but it's going to kill me.
Well, by the way, that's the opening, he's also kind of a very good, he has a good sense of story, almost like a journalist. That opening pilot of Landman is about a 3 generations of Mexican-American oil roughnecks who work on the same rig. So it's like a grandpa, the son, and then sort of a son-in-law, or something like that, right? And they're all killed in an accident, which, as you say, can happen anytime, and it's very dangerous work. That's based on a real story, which comes from the podcast Boomtown that Taylor Sheridan based this series Landman on. It's very good. I listened to the whole thing. And he credits the creator of that podcast as co-creator of Landman. But he just took that. That's a great story. It's a very moving story. And he just took that and saw that as great potential for a pilot and used it. And it's really illustrative of, And he did a smart thing, which was cast a fairly well-known actor, Michael Pena, as one of the guys. So you think, oh, this is a series regular because I've seen this guy before. He was in Sicario, Mexico, for example. I mean, Narcos, Mexico.
He
And then
was
he
an
kills,
Ant-Man. He was Ant-Man's buddy in Ant-Man. You'd
and
recognize him
then
if you saw him. Yeah.
he's not afraid to kill people off, which is another of his gifts. And, as a dramatist, which is in Yellowstone, he kills off one of the Kevin Costner's sons
Yeah.
early,
In the first
who
episode.
shows up now. And that's another thing he does. He used the same actors over and over again in every
Right.
single show, to the point where it's actually confusing. So there'll be the same actress in two shows that are airing at the same time, with the
Yeah.
same actor.
However, they're 100 years apart. That's the other
Yeah,
thing, is that one of them
right.
is in
Period
1883
costume.
and the other is in
Sure.
1924. 1883, by the way, which I think is probably his best show. And again, just to give you a sense of, though we don't really talk about it in the piece, just the capaciousness of his gifts. So 1883 is the story of how this family gets to the area where the ranch is, but that's not what the show is about. The show is about a cattle drive from Texas up through Oregon, and how the entire cattle drive is a horrible, nightmarish disaster. And it's an 8-episode tragedy. It's Imagine Lonesome Dove as a tragedy, at the end of which almost everybody that you have followed and watched and cared about ends up dead.
Yeah.
And it's all very credible, and everything that happens is very believable. And it's kind of startling that you would get something this bleak and dark, but it's emotionally incredibly involving, and also shows this astounding eye for casting, because the two stars of 1883 are the country singer Tim McGraw and his wife Faith Hill, who are the original Duttons of Yellowstone, and they are sensationally good.
They're great.
And everybody on these shows
Yeah.
is like jaw-droppingly good, including all of the relatively non-professional cowboys he hires to play the ranch hands and things like that. Really,
It should be noted that
like,
he's not afraid to put himself in these shows.
no, and
He quite
yeah,
enjoy. Yeah.
yeah,
So he has a part in Yellowstone as a horse trader and sort of scoundrel and scallywag who was a friend of the head ranch hand on Yellowstone. And is a pretty funny character, where he gets to show off his real life horse skills. I guess Taylor Sheridan actually knows what he's doing. So there'll be these long scenes of Taylor Sheridan in a corral doing things like spinning around like a top on a horse, or a thing where you ride your horse and then it stops on a dime over and over and over again. And then he also put himself in Lioness as this kind of badass, contractor, ex Delta Force type, who has this incredibly. There was the most recent episode where they get in some horrific firefight as part of this operation in Iraq, where there's hordes of Iranian National Guard soldiers almost wiped them all out. And then after it's over, his character says something like, "Oh, that got a little nutty. Got a little nutty, didn't it?" Like, sort of, So he plays these tough guys, and he likes to put himself in there. And he's
right.
in one scene, no shirt. He's clearly like spending a lot of time in the weight room.
Right.
But yeah, he casting. And what's interesting, just politically, if you assume that most of the 90% of these actors are probably consider themselves classic Hollywood liberals. I'm not sure about Harrison Ford, but they don't have a problem with being in his shows, because they know how good these shows are. I think they
Yeah.
appreciate the writing. They obviously know they're popular, but I think it's just interesting that they're willing to turn off their politics, what are probably their real life politics, to appear in these shows that have these long kind of quasi-Trumpian screeds in them.
And that's the reason that it's an important subject, because you and I both have spent many decades trying to suss out the connection between popular culture and American politics. Does culture affect politics? Does politics affect culture? Do we watch is Hollywood ruined by its obsession with kind of liberal practical politics, or is it informed by them because this is what people want? And if anything has demonstrated that there is a world that Hollywood does not understand, that is the world that voted for Donald Trump. It is the unexpected triumph of Taylor Sheridan and the fact that the Paramount Network, run incidentally under the corporate control of a non-leftist corporate head in Shari Redstone, said, you just go do whatever you want because you obviously have some secret sauce that nobody understands. And that secret sauce is, this is a great country and there's all of these people out there who are trying to ruin it. And maybe you don't like, maybe it's vulgar who he blames. And maybe it's not fair. And maybe the people he lionizes don't really deserve to be lionized. But that is the drama. The dramaturgy is, America was once a great country. It is being deracinated. It is being demasculinized. It's a huge issue on these shows that these men are men and that they are not afraid to use their hand. And what's more, that the women that you admire are tough and resolute and perfectly willing to be aggressive in pursuit of the interests of the things that they care about, and to be taken care of by the men who love them. So it's a world that no one in Hollywood has allowed to be portrayed in this fashion, and he owns it. And these shows are getting 15, 20 million people to watch them every week, and nothing is watched by 15 million people every week anymore, ever, anywhere.
It reminds me of a piece a million years ago when I was at the New York Times, and I did a piece about stuff New Yorkers didn't know about that the rest of the country like took for granted. I forget, there was something like one of the examples though was, I think Reba McEntire was doing a show on Broadway or something like that. And people were like, who is this amazing star? Wow, she's good.
Yeah, she was
Like,
Annie Get Your Gun. Yeah, she did Annie Get Your Gun.
90% of America knows exactly. I mean, country music. Huh. Wow, that's interesting. People listen to this. It's like that. Like, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, people actually want to watch. I mean, shows with cowboys and, where people belt sand and, one of the scenes in Yellowstone, the most recent one, it's one of the sons fixing up a cabin. As I said in the piece, it looks like Home Depot, but it's set to country. The music's great throughout. And I'm not exactly a country music fan, but somehow he finds country music that is like cooler. I don't know a better way to describe it. I end up liking it all, looking up, who is this guy? It sounds kind of good. But there's flags everywhere. It's a celebration of America, while at the same time being dark. I don't know. It's a very weird tonal stuff that he pulls off,
Very dark. And that's what's Trumpian about it in that sense, which is that it is not Lee Greenwood singing God Bless the USA. It is the USA is at risk and at threat of no longer being what made it great. And that is the largest subject of the Taylor Sheridan project.
And you mentioned the women too. Like, I've heard complaint, oh, he's a misogynist, because he'll have there's definitely sexualized scenes with very attractive women. At the same time, most of these women are absolute tough as nails, happy to chew out some other guy who thinks he's tougher and absolutely demolish them in a courtroom or in a bar or wherever. These women
smash a bottle over their head.
I mean, they're very strong. He has no problem with strong women. And then, in terms of who watches it, I just yesterday walking my dog and I ran into this guy, like a dog walking friend, and he's a music producer. He's definitely very traditionally liberal. And we got talking about it. He's like, I started watching this show Landman. It's like, it's really good. I'm like, yeah. And I could tell like he didn't really agree with the thing, but he was, even with, for instance, he mentioned the scene where Billy Bob Thornton rants about what's wrong with clean energy. And it was like, well, even if I don't agree, like it made me think about it, so yeah, like even if you aren't necessarily on board, he's doing it in a way that maybe will bring more people in, at least listen to it, because again, because it's so dramatically compelling.
And the idea that you want, if you're going to establish a dramatic situation, the dramatic situation being people are working in these oil fields, and they're not Exxon, they're not Mobil, they're not the big guys. They're rich and they're tough, but they are, again, very Trumpish. They are the people who are down in the ground trying to get the oil out of the ground. They're not in a boardroom. I mean, there are scenes in boardrooms, but that is the point, that the wealth comes from the land, and their character comes from their exploitation of and love of the land at the same time. And there's class tensions. Landman is rife with class tensions between Mexican Americans and some rich white kids who seem to be slumming, and various other sorts of things. And Mayor of Kingstown is a show entirely about a kind of town that is bubbling on the verge of race war, because half the town lives inside of 7 prisons.
At the
This
same
is,
time, everybody seems to travel by private jet
yeah,
in Taylor Sheridan, like so in Landman, but also uh, in Lioness, this CIA, exclusively private
yeah,
jets.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well, I mean, listen. Let's not go too far. I mean, if you can get a private jet, you should have one. That's a very important
speaking of
part.
which, we should also mention that Taylor Sheridan has gotten so rich off of this that he bought the largest, I think, cattle ranch in the country, 250,000 acres in Texas, um, called the 666, which he's
4
6666,
sixes, yeah, the
not
4
satanic,
sixes,
but like 4 sixes
yeah,
ranch, legendary ranch in Texas. I guess maybe it was in trouble. He comes in and and now he's doing a show there, set
yeah,
there, and he's already promoting the merch.
yeah,
Someone was drinking 4 sixes vodka on
yeah,
Yellowstone. Yeah, so
yeah,
he's done quite well,
yeah.
but still manages, yeah, to stay in touch with, I think, this sense of, the average person and what they want to see, certainly, and the kind of entertainment they want to consume.
I mean, the single most disturbing aspect of him for us, for you and me and anybody who writes for a living, is that this guy writes 90% of these shows. So again, we're talking about Yellowstone, 1883, 1923, Mayor of Kingstown, Tulsa King,
Lioness.
Landman, Lioness. That's 7 shows. And he has bylines on the scripts of 90% of them. He wrote the entirety of Landman himself. Has written almost the entirety of Yellowstone himself. It is freakish, his
Yeah,
productivity.
I I met a woman who was a writer on the show, and I didn't ask her at the time how that works, because there have been writers like this. Aaron Sorkin, West Wing, he'd hire all these fancy, high-priced TV writers, and they became glorified researchers. You would deliver him 5 pages on, here's a congressional subcommittee, and then he would just do it himself.
Yeah.
And David Kelly is another one like that. There are these freaks of nature who can pull it off. I mean, so is he really writing all these? I mean, if he is, it's astounding.
He
I don't know
is.
how he
I mean,
does it.
because you can sort of tell that he is, because particularly I think on Landman, the voice is very
Yeah,
distinctive.
yeah,
And in a weird way, every character kind of sounds like every other character, which means that it's not like he's farming out different things to different people, which is how you would ordinarily write a soap. It's like, you write for this character, I'm writing for that character. We'll merge the 3 plot lines and put them together, and we'll see who puts whose name on the scripts. Anyway, that's just one of the reasons that you can say that this is his unified vision. That's a very hard thing to say in television,
yeah,
because there are so many cooks, in the kitchen.
yeah. I mean,
He
good
also
luck
directs, and
finding a
he
writer who
directs
could
half
do
of them.
that. And he directs,
And I
right?
think he
But even
directed most of Landman also. So
it's
yeah, he's
insane.
a
But I
surreal.
don't think I think you would have a hard time finding another writer who could or would be able to crank out one of those long disquisitions on what's wrong with America, and I, it's him.
Yeah.
He's the only guy who could, or I think would do that.
Right.
Um,
But it's very rare that you get a popular culture figure who does seem to crystallize a given cultural moment. I mean, in the late 60s, early 70s, it would said that, Easy Rider represented some kind of fundamental change in America's understanding of itself, or how young people wanted to look at America on screen, or the Cosby Show changed the way everybody perceived African American life in the United States and made Barack Obama's rise possible several decades later, and all of that. And you can really say that about Taylor. People have had a very great deal of difficulty trying to reckon with what it is that made Trump's rise, fall, and re-rise possible. And it's odd, but suggestive, that this is one of the very few places in which you can say, I don't think that this would have happened at a different time in a different place, or that Trump could have restored himself without the kind of attitudes that are represented on these shows, that then are ballasted by these audiences. And they're bigger than we even think, because I'm talking about the number of people who watch them every week. So then they're watched every week like this, and then they go on streaming services, and then they go on other streaming services, and by the time Yellowstone is through with its run, 100 million people will have watched episodes of Yellowstone, not 15 million people. And
I
is
mean,
that going to make them
yeah,
Trump voters? No. But
right. It's the vibe shift, as I just
yeah,
read and described as. And he was ahead of it, though, because,
well,
yeah, sure, now, last couple, okay, but when did Yellowstone premiere?
17,
2017.
2017.
Yeah, I mean, that's, now I guess you could argue, okay, well, Trump was in office then, but yeah, he's definitely, yeah, I think he's the only person out there who has really, in entertainment, who's really capitalized so
Yeah.
far.
You could have
I
said
mean,
like that, those first couple of episodes of when Roseanne returned to
right,
the Roseanne show and had this like huge triumph with these shows, and then went crazy and got fired off her own show because she started calling, Obama administration officials monkeys and things like that. And then
right.
somehow, whatever that was, that lightning in a bottle, that world of people who had not been served by American culture for so long. But you can see it in other places. You can see it in like the comedy of Shane Gillis, or the
Yeah.
comedy of Nate Bargatze, or these guys that Bill Burr, these guys who come out of nowhere, and what they are saying is, I am sick and tired of being told I'm not allowed to speak my mind about the things that I find so annoying. And that Taylor Sheridan has no comic sensibility whatsoever. I would say he's one of the
Yeah.
heaviest spirited writers that we've ever seen.
Although I will say Billy Bob's is pretty funny in Landman.
Well, he is funny because he is funny.
Someone said he's just doing bad Santa.
But I don't think that's right, because the whole point about him is that nothing, including his crazy wife or a terrible thing that happens on his rant or whatever, he is unflappable. And the reason
Yeah.
that he can be the landman that he is that he has seen everything.
I
Everything
think
bad, everything awful, everything terrible, everything good. And he knows just 3 hours from now, there's going to be another mess he's going to have to go clean up. And he's just not going to get too upset about anything.
the Shane Gillis comparison, the comedian Shane Gillis comparison is interesting. He had a big Netflix special and he has this TV show now, but he's a guy he traveled in liberal circles, right? Like he lived in Brooklyn. He was a teacher in Europe. Like in the same way as Sheridan, they know that world. They're not just, rubes coming out of nowhere with these backward ideas. They've traveled in those worlds, and in a way maybe has allowed them to speak to not only their own people, but also guys like my dog walking friend, in a
Yeah.
way that will be intriguing. Or, Shane Gillis does, he's just funny. You just can't deny that he's
Yeah.
funny. And Sheridan, you can't deny that this stuff is incredibly compelling and dramatic and fun to watch.
Okay, so that is the anti-woke king of Hollywood Lets Loose. Taylor Sheridan shows explain how and why we got Trump again. Our cover story, you can read it at commentary.org, or if you are a subscriber, of course, it will be in your mailbox by the time you hear this, and you can read it and look at Taylor Sheridan's very, very attractive punim. You can see Billy Bob Thornton standing there looking great at 69 on the cover. And that is Rick Marin's chef d'oeuvre on the cover of Commentary. So, Rick, fantastic to have you on. Thrilling to be able to have a conversation here on the podcast that has gone in this direction as opposed to many others. And we will be back. This is a holiday episode, so I'm not dating it. I don't know what day it's going to run. I don't know whether we're going to be back on tomorrow or whether it's a Friday, so it'll be back on a Monday, as I would ordinarily say. But I will end by saying what I always say, which is keep the candle burning.